I gotta tidy my hair a little bit. There we go. That's better. All right. We are online.
Need a haircut.
Yeah, this week. All right, here we go.
The radical, fundamental principles of freedom, rational self-interest, and individual rights. This is the Yaron Brook Show.
All right, everybody, welcome to the Yaron Brook Show. Sunday afternoon. Weekend. All right, today we've got our sponsors Q&A. We've got let's see, 8 $25 a month or more. Some of you I know give quite a bit more than $25. Q&A with our supporters, and then let's see, has all right. YouTube is working. I wasn't sure. Okay. And we'll start with, as usual, we will start with our $25 contributors, and then we'll also do some super chats. So those of you who want to ask questions that are watching live on YouTube, feel free to use the super chat to ask any questions, and I will get to them. Of course, the higher the dollar amount you put in the super chat, the more likely it is that I will answer the questions. So with that, let's get started. We will start off with in the order you guys appear on my screen. So we'll start with Nick. Hi, Nick. How are you?
How you doing?
Good.
All right. Yeah, I had some thoughts about your diatribe yesterday about Trump and all that. No, okay. I wanted to state that, don't you think the Trump brand is very toxic right now? The PGA canceled a big event on one of his courses. A lot of his hotels, they want to take the Trump banner off. I mean, they're paying him to take it off.
Yep.
I mean, how in the world, let's put aside all the cultists, the Trump cultists. How in the world is he going to capture the center? He has absolutely zero chance.
So I agree with that. I think the challenge for the Republican Party is that he splits the vote. That is, there is a significant number. Maybe it's 20%, right? Maybe it's 40% of Republicans. Maybe it's 20% of Republicans. It's hard to tell, but it's somewhere in the 20 to 40% range of Republicans. And some people would argue maybe it's 70% of the Republican voters who adore him. Right? Put aside the cult aspect, they adore him. They think he is the future. They think his ideas are the ideas of the future. So he splinters the Republican Party. He is going to put up people against mainstream, House members, against senators. That has the risk of his people winning because they bring enough of the primary voters out. And if they win, then they lose to the Democrats, and they lose even more seats in the House, or maybe lose more seats in the Senate. That's the danger he poses. I don't think he can win. I don't think he can win a national election. I don't think his people can win, but I think he does a huge amount of damage to the party itself and to its ability to reform as a real opposition party to the Democrats.
Yeah, but that has to happen. The Republican Party has to crash and burn and then rise like a phoenix and reinvent itself. That has to happen. That process has to happen. There's no shortcut to that.
I agree completely. So all I'm putting out is that's what's happening. And my hope is that it happens faster. And what scares me, what I think is very disturbing, is the fact that so many Republican elected officials are rallying to Trump's side, even though clearly he's a loser. That even though he's going to destroy the party, they're still rallying to his side. And in that sense, they're prolonging the period of decline, of crashing and burning. And it's going to take them longer to rise up, whether as a phoenix or something else, but it's going to take them longer to rise up. So That's what scares me right now, is that he's doing real lasting damage that will take the Republican Party longer to rise up from. The other side of this is, the alternative is, which is another negative, is that the worst elements in the Republican Party, the Josh Hawleys of the Republican Party, will replace Trump and try to bring kind of the party together and appeal to some people in the Senate by, with the handouts that Josh Hawley wants to do. I mean, some of those are in the middle class, and that somehow, Josh Hawley molds the Republican Party in his image, which would be even a bigger disaster than I think Trump would be. So I think we're in for a very, very dicey periods for the Republican Party, whether it crashes or burns, how long it stays like that, how long it takes it to rise up, and what form it takes when it rises. Does it take the form of a semblance of pro-free markets and pro-individual rights, or does it take a form of conservative nationalism, but now with a real charismatic leader with principles, just really, really bad ones, versus Trump, who I don't think was that charismatic in the end, but who mostly was no principles, no ideas. So what is the future of the Republican Party? That's what's intriguing at this point. And Trump makes it difficult.
But Josh Hawley, I mean, his role in the insurrection on January the 6th really put him in a corner. I would agree with you. I would agree with you before that he's charismatic and all that, and he still is. But he just put himself really in a corner, and that was the good thing about January the 6th. The
best thing about January 6th, I agree completely. I celebrated January 6th from the perspective of it made Josh Hawley look bad. The question now is there somebody else of Josh Hawley's ideology? And because there are a lot of think tanks now on the right set up to support those ideas, is there some rising star? And I don't know. But that's something to watch. But that wing of the Republican Party, that's the scary wing, the kind of leftist economically, nationalist culturally. That's the wing that is most that we should be watching and worried about. But I hope that the better people win. I hope that I think the better people are people like Nikki Haley and Ben Sasse. Although, granted, Ben Sasse is quite religious. But I think of the religious conservatives, he's the smartest, most and more thoughtful and more connected to the founding fathers than any of the others that I know of. And he had the balls to vote for impeachment. So I give him a lot of credit for that, even though he's super conservative in the traditional conservative sense. So we'll see. It's going to be interesting to watch the next 4 years. And I really hope that Trump just collapses. That is, that the whole Trump thing collapses and into a heap of nothing.
It will eventually. It'll run out of gas.
Yeah, I agree, because it's not
ideologically driven, like you said.
Exactly. And that can't win. So it's what replaces it that's important. All right, thanks, Nick. Emmett.
Hey, Ron.
Hey.
So I've been thinking about topics that might be interesting as a positive show that you've been kind of talking about recently. And one of the things that I had always wanted when I was young was advice about how to choose a career and be productive. Yep. And I thought that might be something that would be interesting to have a guest speaker come on, and maybe you can say something about it now, just kind of a sketch and an outline, but maybe that might be something that, I don't know, a Gina Gorland or somebody else might be a good guest to do. What are your thoughts on that?
I have to think about who would be. I'll ask Gina if that's a strength of hers. But yeah, I think that is, and I get a lot of questions about it. And I've said some things about it, but I feel like I'm repeating myself. That is, I don't know that I have anything really new to say about it. I mean, it really is about introspecting, finding what gets you excited and what interests you. Trying to find an intersecting thing out there in the world that where you can make money at the same time as following that thing that you find interesting and are passionate about. But it also involves, in my case, and personally, and I think in a lot of people, just being willing to experiment. That is being willing to take risk and try things. And, I tell young people, don't think of going to college as you've chosen your career for a whole lifetime. That's not how the world works anymore. And it's probably not the right mindset. Go in to explore, try different fields, see what interests you. As long as you're doing something that's interesting, as long as you're learning something, you're not wasting your time. Don't think of it as wasted time. Some people know exactly what they want to do. Most people don't. So go and try different professions and try different jobs, see what you like. So it really is exploration. It's introspection and exploration. And I think in past generations, there wasn't much of this exploration because the idea was you got a job and you work for a company for life or whatever. I don't think that with a good part of our modern culture is that doesn't exist anymore. People are not that static, and they have a more dynamic view of their life and their willingness to change and move and do things. So at least some people. There's also, unfortunately, lots of evidence in America that movement from between state to state is actually shrunk, is actually in decline, and part of that has to do with the welfare state. So yeah, I think introspection and then exploration are the two aspects of, I would say, of finding a career. Overlap between what interests you, what gets you excited, what you find interesting, and the professions that exist. That's how I did it, because I had no clue what I wanted to do, and I didn't really discover what I wanted to do until I was like 40. So it takes time.
I follow a similar path. Yep.
Yeah. Great. Thanks,
Cool.
Evan.
Thanks.
All right, Jonathan.
Hi, Yaron. Congratulations on a bunch of really interesting shows lately. And as you pointed out, I find Trump boring, as you have also said, but you're often asked about it. So I agree with you. I'm enjoying you moving on from Trump and on from politics onto some more interesting things. So
Good.
Keep it up. I wanted to make a quick recommendation to you. Actually, you've brought some great, interesting content to us. I know you liked Fauda, and I recently got through a new series from one of the writers from Fauda called Tehran.
Yep.
You've heard of it.
I've seen it. I'm way ahead of you, Jonathan.
All right. Well, tell me what you thought, because I thought it was like 24 meets Fauda with a captivating young star and heroic in nature. And I really would recommend it. What was your thought?
Yeah, no, I agree. I think I recommended it on a show, but yes, I thought it was very well made. It was exciting. It was interesting because you don't really, other than what was that show on Showtime where they had some scenes in Iran? You don't really get much in terms of in Tehran, in Iran, kind of spy action, adventure kind of stuff. And actually, it's probably the most active place in the world for spies and action and stuff like that. I mean, there seems to be an assassination going on in Tehran like once a month or something of some scientist or some espionage guy. So it seemed super relevant, right? And it was very exciting and very well done. It didn't quite capture me as much as Fauda. It didn't have the kind of intensity and to some extent, newness, right? Fauda was really new in the way it was presented, in the way the action is presented, the dynamic of it. So I still think Fauda's I enjoyed more, just more the great intensity. But Tehran, which is by some of the same people as Fauda, really, really good. It's in Hebrew and Farsi, so with English subtitles. I guess there's scenes in English as well, but mainly it's English and Farsi. If you remember, if you haven't seen Fauda, see Fauda. If you haven't seen Tehran, watch Tehran. Israeli television generally is just off the charts in terms of how good it's become. It's pretty amazing how many good shows are coming out of Israel these days, and particularly in this espionage and action genre. areas. So,
And,
yeah.
and I'll just quickly also say I also happened to listen to an interview that Alon Journo did from the Ayn Rand Institute with an Iranian dissident woman who basically in effect escaped. So to see that dramatized in that kind of brutal, barbaric, primitive nature world, and then actually hear a woman talking about her real experience was meaningful from both the Institute and kind of the drama of it. So great viewing, and keep it up.
Yeah, I mean, it's so connected. One of the things I like about it is it's so connected to current events. I think, the whole show centers around the Israeli attempt to destroy Iran's nuclear capabilities and a mission to go in and destroy those capabilities, both on the ground and from the air. And it's super exciting and super interwoven with things that are very current, with Biden's attempt to bring Iran back into the nuclear deal, with Trump's sanctions, but not really doing anything about their capabilities, but killing one of their generals. All of that is in the show, so it makes it very relevant. I mean, I still think the best espionage show that I know of in recent times is actually a French show. I've recommended it in the past. I'll remind everybody of it. It's called The Bureau. The Bureau, I think there are 5 or 6 seasons. It's brutal. This is not anything you should expect to have a happy ending at the end of it, but it is amazingly well done. And again, very real in the sense of the kind of power plays that are going on in the world around us. So The Bureau is excellent, brilliantly made, and I think a really, really good show. Really, really good show. If you want, skip the final episode of the final season. Maybe that'll do well for your sense of life. But other than that, it's brilliant. Troy, thank you. I mean, that is incredibly generous. You've already been amazingly generous with your own book show, so thank you. Okay, let's go to Roy. You there, Roy?
There we go. Just a little clumsy on muting. Before I ask a question, I'd like to comment on the 30-second video you showed yesterday of Josh Hawley. For people who didn't see it, in these wonderful 30 seconds, he called for the breaking up of big tech. Just break them up, he said, in the name of the people. My reaction was visceral and immediate. It was a combination of revulsion and, for the first time, terror. I mean, revulsion I was used to with Obama's "you didn't make that" and de Blasio's gleeful promise to tax the hell out of the rich. But this, in addition to having the collectivism behind it, that sense, which so many other pronouncements have had, this had the call to mob rule by tearing it down, breaking it up in the name of the people. And I thought of the hordes of Bolsheviks in Russia, in the teens, 20s, 30s. That's what they did. And this was, in a sense, a tiny bit worse than January 6th, because there was the same sort of call to mob or mob rule, but it was for that day, for that specific event. He was signaling a new way of running government. And that was I'm getting goosebumps now, just even thinking about it and mentioning it. So I just wanted to get that out because it's really upset me.
Yep. Yeah, no, I agree completely. But I've been warning about Josh Hawley for a long time. I've been watching his career and watching his intellectual. I don't think development, because I don't know it's developed, but where he comes from intellectually. I read some essays he's written. He has come out very violently against individualism, against the pursuit of happiness. He is a collectivist through and through, a fascist in the sense of government control over the economy, the semblance of private property, but government control over the economy, all in the name of nationalism and national greatness. He is backed by an entire intellectual infrastructure, by intellectuals and think tanks and people supporting this agenda. There was a whole conference of national conservatives that I reported on, I think 2 years ago now. They didn't have a second one, I think only because of COVID, but they certainly had a first one. So this is, and if you watch the speeches there, anywhere from Tucker Carlson telling us that big corporations were coming for our kids and were trying to destroy our kids, to Josh Hawley's nationalism and a bunch of others, just over and over and over again, the collectivism was reeking in the place, calling for industrial policy, central planning. This is from Republicans, conservatives, under the label of conservatism, all organized by an Israeli conservative by the name of Yoram Hazony, who hopefully I'll be debating as soon as this COVID thing goes away and we can do some live debates in Texas on the issue of nationalism. He put out a book that's become a centerpiece for all of this called The Virtue of Nationalism. And this is the rising, this is the new thing. They adore Orban in Hungary, who is a mini authoritarian dictator in Hungary. They adore the Catholic Polish regime that is basically silencing opposition and imposing kind of a not quite a theocratic, but a religious imbued kind of governing and policies on Poland and also silencing opposition. They adore Central Europe, and that's where much of these ideas are coming from. So it truly is the Republican Party right now. That element is very, very spooky. And the fundamental question is going to be politically, are there enough of the better people within the Republican Party, both intellectuals and politicians and people in politics? Are there enough of them, and can they inspire the voters to support a different agenda? Do they have an inspirational sign? Do the better people there have anything to inspire voters? And the answer to that is, I just don't know. I mean, I am on the email lists of a number of kind of Republican conservatives who I like. I mean, I don't love any of them, but I like. And the question is, are they going to be able to muster enough support across the right to have any kind of say in the future of the Republican Party? I don't know. But Josh Hawley scares me. But I do agree with Nick that Josh Hawley got a real punch to the gut. I mean, he really was devastated by what happened January 6th. He lost some of his intellectual supporters, some of his financial supporters, some of his political supporters. We'll see how he rebounds from that. I think the CPAC speech was a step in that direction of his attempt to rebound, but he really did. That hand in the fist to the crowd, January 16th, he really suffered for that. On the other hand, certain people view him now as the new leader of that part of the Republican Party. So we will see.
Well, okay. That was my preamble.
Oh.
The question.
Okay.
With the Food and Drug Administration, I've heard you say a couple of times that you could see it existing if its role were limited to fraud.
Yep.
Dealing with cases of fraud. So I was thinking, do we really need a Food and Drug Administration for that? Or, as in the case of fraud in general, why isn't it under the Justice Department? And you use expert witnesses, experts and labs, independent experts.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't mean to need a whole agency for it. All I meant was, that the only role of government is to catch fraudsters. So whether it is a division of the FBI or a section in the Justice Department, or because it requires certain expertise, maybe it's its own independent unit, it does, and you'd have to have this for financial fraud, for other types of fraud. I think all of those are basically, as you said, divisions of the Justice Department that bring in experts, use experts, develop certain expertise in-house to catch these things. But it is not preemptive. It is catching people who've committed fraud. And that requires a completely different mentality than what exists today at the FDA or at the Justice Department or at any other parts of the US government.
Yeah.
But absolutely, yeah, you don't need alphabet agencies to do that. But, I often say about the SEC, I mean, yes, I can see that the government has to protect us from fraud. And the financial fraud is complex, so you need kind of expertise in that. But that's not what the SEC does. The SEC is not about catching fraud. I wish it was. But it's about regulating my behavior and all other investor behavior.
Okay,
So
thanks.
it's perverse and distorted.
Yeah.
All right, thanks, Roy. Daniel?
Thanks, Ron. I've been watching a story in China. It's about a man, Lao Jiaomin, I guess. He's an asset manager who, like a lot of people, was part of the Communist Party. He, in the 2000s, did very well for himself, became associated with some high members in the economic side of the government. When I think it was about 2008, the Chinese government got rid of a bunch of bad loans, underperforming loans, spun them off into a corporation. He became head of that corporation, did very well, apparently, made a lot of money for himself. Then the people he was working with in the government kind of fell out of favor. He was eventually thrown out of the CCP, out of the Communist Party. Ended up being charged with and tried for bribery, embezzlement, and bigamy. He was convicted of those on January 3rd, and executed for them on January 24th.
Wow.
When does bribery, embezzlement, and bigamy ever rise to the point of having someone executed? And what about the Chinese claim that, well, maybe it's wrong by Western rules, but it doesn't apply because he's a Chinese citizen or was?
Well, I don't think they ever rise to the level of a death penalty. And I don't know that they're even true, right? We know that the Chinese Communist government uses, particularly since Xi came into power, this has been a systematic approach of his to use anti-corruption laws, to use the idea that I'm cleaning it up. I'm cleaning the economy up from corruption and from bribery, because it does exist quite a bit in China, to get rid of political enemies, to get rid of people that he views as enemies of the state. But if he tried them as enemies of the state, the authoritarian nature would be more obvious, right? And therefore he would have a bigger challenge internally than he has. And remember, I don't think the Chinese worry too much about what the West thinks of them, although they worry about although I do think they care about the bully pulpit. I do think they care about the West calling them out on these issues if it was called out in principle and with moral authority. What they don't care is about the pragmatism of a Trump or a Biden or pretty much any American president in recent history, where it's nothing and it's meaningless and it doesn't stand for anything. So they can get away with this. If Westerners say what's going on here, they say, look, this is how we have to clean up. We have to clean up our economy because there is this bribery. You guys keep telling us our economy is too corrupt. Here we're doing what you guys want us to do. But he's clearly using that to get rid of people he doesn't like. It truly is sad. I mean, it's sad is an understatement, because China was heading in the right direction. I mean, I still stand by that, right? China was heading in the right direction. These incredibly successful, amazing entrepreneurs. I mean, think about Jack Ma, think about many of the entrepreneurs in China. And many of them now have been several of them now have been executed, or at least are spending significant time in jail. They rose up in the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s. They were incredibly innovative, incredibly successful, changed life in China in dramatic ways, right? Improved the life of the average Chinese person by a couple of centuries, brought China into the 21st century, created a middle class. Again, these entrepreneurs, businessmen, that's what they do. And instead of being rewarded for that by being left alone, basically, many of them have been punished. Those who don't toe the line are being punished and some being executed, and some are sitting in jail. And Jack Ma is seemingly under some kind of house arrest, or at least he's keeping a low profile because he's afraid of what might be his fate. So it truly is tragic. China had the opportunity and was heading in a direction of being a real economic powerhouse, but more than that, a place of real economic freedom. And I know people find that hard to believe, but if you went to China, 10 years ago, it's stunning what was going on there, and what the amount of production that was happening, and innovation. And I mean, and it's still true that in some respects, China's more innovative than the US. I mean, you can do more online in China than you can in the US. Through WeChat and other platforms are much more robust than our platforms, and electronic payments and all kinds of other things are much more robust there. And that's because of these entrepreneurs. And yet what's happening right now is the government is taking credit for all of that economic growth. The government is taking credit for all of that economic success. The government is taking credit for the creation of the middle class, clamping down on the most successful entrepreneurs, restricting the freedom of some of these companies. And again, we saw that with the withdrawal of Jack Ma's IPO for his insurance company, and becoming more and more authoritarian. Now, that is tragic for the Chinese people. It's tragic for the whole world, because we all benefited from China's rise. And it's horrific for the victims, the people who are really going to suffer for this by going to jail and by being killed and just by having less freedom. So it really is tragic. I know I get harassed on this online, but I love China. I like the Chinese people. It's an amazing place. The Chinese people are amazingly entrepreneurial. They're amazingly hardworking. The progress they have made between 1980 and today is stunning, unprecedented historically in terms of the speed at which it's happened. And that is a testament to their entrepreneurial spirit and their hardworking and their energy. And I experienced that when I was there a few times. I'm no expert on China, but I visited, I can't remember, 3, 4, 5 times. And every time I marveled at just that energy that existed in the streets and in the workplaces. So it's truly tragic. Now, the flip side of that is that it will fail. That is, the more the Chinese central government takes credit for the economic success, the more they will have to take the blame for the economic failures, the more it will be centered around them, and the more likely it is that there will be ultimately some kind of revolution in China, or some kind of civil war in China, and that will not be pretty. But I think it probably is inevitable at the way we go, unless there's some kind of revolution that is peaceful. But I find that hard to believe that the Chinese government will give up power peacefully. So
no one in the Chinese government is saying the purpose of government is the protection of individual rights.
No.
And what I see our failure right now is that no one steps forward and says individual rights is not just a Western or a US concept. It is built into the nature of people, regardless of where you're from, regardless of what government is over you.
Absolutely. People are already accusing me of all kinds of crimes for saying that I love the Chinese and I love China. I hate the Chinese government, if that helps anybody. And yes, I'm opposed to what they're doing to the Uyghurs in Western China. Yes, I'm opposed to what they do to a variety of religious sects. And I'm primarily opposed to the fact that they violate individual rights left and right. And I'm opposed to the fact that particularly they violate the rights of the most productive in their societies. So give me a break, right? I did not say I love the Chinese government. But the real challenge I see happening in China is that there is no model for them to emulate. That is, it used to be the case up until about 10, 15 years ago, certainly before the financial crisis to some extent, but certainly in the era of Ronald Reagan, there was at least a perception that the US stood for something, believed in something to strive to. It was, Ronald Reagan said, we're shiny city on a hill. We weren't really, we know we weren't that shiny, but relative to the world, we were pretty shiny. But over the last 40 years, that shine has come completely off. We now have presidents, Obama and Trump, the first two presidents really in American history, saying we're nothing special about Americans. Or the only thing special about Americans is we're America, right? Is the borders. And as Tucker Carlson said, the natural beauty of the country, as if China isn't naturally beautiful. Just a bizarre statement. But there is no model. Where they're going to learn individual rights from? We're going to learn about the role of government, if not from the United States, and we don't have that anymore.
Maybe Hong Kong and Taiwan, maybe a little better.
Well, yes, but those are the countries that are being yes, in terms of existential reality, but no in terms of intellectual support. There's no intellectual. Even in Hong Kong, intellectual support for this. And to the extent that there is the pro-democracy, this amorphous thing. And then the Chinese look at democracy in the United States and in the West, and they go, we don't want that. Right? So the problem is that even Hong Kong doesn't have an intellectual. This is one of the biggest failures of the Trump administration, among many, is the lack of support for Hong Kong. A lack of any principled support of Hong Kong. Imagine if somebody in America, a leader in America, had articulated why Hong Kong is special, why Hong Kong is successful, why we want to protect Hong Kong, and what is the fundamental difference between Hong Kong and China. And that at least some people in China would have said, right? Or they would have, or the opposition would have at least viewed that as bolstering them. And there is an opposition in China. They're mostly hiding and scared right now. But we did nothing. We didn't stand up for them. We didn't speak up. We're not speaking up now. We're not going to do it under Biden. We didn't do it on Trump. We certainly didn't do it on Obama. So and in the financial crisis, the Chinese learned that U.S. style capitalism doesn't work. That was what they learned from the financial, because that's what we said. George Bush said, we have to save capitalism in America by increasing the role of government in markets. So who are they to question that? So I blame America for not being the model, right? I blame our intellectuals. Our intellectuals today are enamored, both left and right. Both the Josh Hawleys and the Paul Krugmans of the world are enamored with the Chinese model. Central planning, industrial planning, a bigger role for the government in the economy. And both on left and right, I hear people saying, look, it worked in China. We should adopt the same thing. Think about industrial policy, which Trump tried to institute, or instead of our attempt with tariffs being, let's lower the world's tariffs, let's bring free trade to the world, we said, no, we're going to copy China and raise tariffs locally. Instead of encouraging China to reduce tariffs, we copied them and increased tariffs. So we're just not a model, and therefore hurting the cause of the better Chinese.
Thank you.
Thanks, Daniel. Naveen.
Hey, Yaron, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, great. A couple of quick, one comment / criticism, and then a quick question, but one longer question. One is, I think it's great that you're recommending all these great shows. Fantastic, right? I love that. But I think you tend to give away a little spoilers about some critical aspects of the show. So I feel like every time you recommend a show, I have to close my eyes right after I hear about the name of the show. So just something to watch out for. But the other quick question is, do we need to watch do you recommend watching Fauda before Tehran? So those are the quick ones.
I
And
don't
then
think it matters. I don't think it matters. Fauda is 3 seasons, and the 4th season is coming out. Tehran is 1 season, and the 2nd season will be coming out. I expect the next season Fauda to come out before the next season of Tehran. So it depends on you how you want to structure it. So
okay, great.
I don't think I've given anything away with Fauda and Tehran. Fauda's very, very intense. That's all.
No, other shows. I'm talking about some other shows that you've done that with. But my longer question is, can you talk about your experience of starting the YouTube thing, the live channels and things like that? Because I'm trying to start a YouTube channel but there's a lot of things that need to be really correct, and I tend to keep procrastinating that. Can you talk about the experience of actually starting it, getting it going, and improving that?
Sure. I mean, I started it as a podcast. So the beginning was a podcast, and it was. So I didn't think about video. I didn't think about YouTube. That seemed too complicated for me. Video, what platform? But I think Amy Peikoff had started using a podcasting platform called Blog Talk Radio. And I said, okay, I can handle that. So I started out with just a podcast, just audio, just with a microphone. And the first show was the day Charlie Hebdo was attacked. So I know that because I was going to do a practice run just to try out the equipment and stuff. And then Charlie Hebdo happened, and I decided to go live. And I did it, the whole show in free speech and what had happened in France. So I'll always remember when it happened, my first venture into this field. Then beyond that, I can't remember. At some point, I went on YouTube, but by that point, I'd already established a certain following on the podcast side of it, and then started, and then at some point started the video. I think the video was maybe a year later. With YouTube, I don't know what kind of stuff you're looking for, right? So, you got to find the right camera. You got to figure out how to stream. You got to do all kind of. I mean, today it's easy because we're all streaming all the time. It took me a while to figure all those things out because this is before Zoom and before we were really doing Zoom regularly. But and then YouTube has become much easier to use over time. So it's much easier now to set up a show and to just stream a show. And then, I'd been on Facebook. So I had accumulated a following in Facebook. And again, I accumulated a following through the podcast on Facebook, and I accumulated a following on Twitter over the years. So it was very, from a marketing perspective, once I launched on YouTube, it was easy to kind of promote on my YouTube and Facebook channels. I mean, it's really important to get an audience to be able to have a presence, particularly on Twitter, but I think also on Facebook, and to build audiences there so that you're building all the audiences at once. I don't know if you have any more specific questions about what I did.
Oh, no, I was mainly asking about what you want to talk on, and how you want to look the audio, but more the planning itself. It's what exactly do you want to talk on, and how do you want to cover it? It's hard for me as a beginner, right? So that's kind of what I'm asking about.
Yeah, I mean, don't use me as an example, because you're gonna have to. I mean, I talk for a living. This is what I do, so it comes easy to me, as you can tell, I think. So you've got to figure out what you want to talk about, kind of lay out some topics. I think what you want to have is an outline in advance, but you don't want to write it out. You want to develop your ability to speak extemporaneously, unless you want one of these. I mean, some podcasts are very successful, more successful than I am, by writing it out. So it depends what you want, right? Depends how long you want. Do you want a short podcast, a long podcast? There's a lot of good podcasts, a lot of good YouTube channels that you can learn from. And you can tell that some of them are scripted. You can tell by just how smooth they are and how the language is just right and perfect. And they're just reading, obviously, a text, or they've learned it by heart. And you have to decide what is your style and what you want to do. And do you trust yourself to be extemporaneous, or do you want it scripted? Scripted is much more work up front, much less work during the show because it's all done. So a lot less energy is required to just follow a script. And then topics, figure out what you think you're particularly good at, what you think the kind of audience you expect to attract is interested in, right? And then, go from there. So don't start with what you think is the most important. Don't start with what you think will change the world. Start with what you're good at, and where the intersection between what you're good at and what you think people are interested in.
Okay, got it. Thank you. Yeah.
And then you can work yourself up to other topics or other fields or whatever as you go along. But definitely start with stuff that you know inside out.
Sure. Thanks.
Sure. All right. We got a lot of people today. This is great. George.
Good afternoon, Yaron.
Hey, George.
During your GameStop shows, it seemed like every 10 to 15 minutes you had to pause to give the disclaimer that you were speaking as Yaron Brook of the Yaron Brook Show and not as Yaron Brook, former finance professor and current finance professional.
Yep.
And you've then added the last couple of weeks, you've been talking about how you now have 500 pages of marketing regulations for your hedge fund. And I kind of want to put those next, in the same bucket as the investigation into Elon Musk for his market moving tweets. Last year, there was a similar rumor that Dave Portnoy, the founder of Barstool Sports, was in a similar pot of hot water because he tweets about the company that he founded and that acquired his own. So I'm wondering, have any of these ever been challenged on First Amendment grounds? And if so, how have they been justified? And if not, what do you think would be the possibility of them, going up to the Supreme Court and maybe giving you some semblance of sanity back and how you can talk about the thing that you actually do in this world?
Yeah. So I actually answered this question on yesterday's show because you sent it to me in advance.
Oh, gosh.
I didn't realize you were sending in advance ask here. So I answered all three of your questions yesterday on the show. So,
I guess I'll go to the gym and listen to podcasts like I normally do.
Yeah. So I'll just say quickly that, just in case you have a follow-up, I'll just say quickly that the Supreme Court is very clear that the First Amendment does not apply. I think thoroughly mistakenly. They believe this First Amendment does not apply to what they call commercial speech. It does not apply to business speech. That speech can be regulated if there is a just cause or if there is a public interest in regulating that speech. And that is true of commercials on TV. That is true of marketing. That is true of all the different regulations on all the different industries that involve what you can and cannot say, and what you can and cannot do. So unfortunately, it is now a well-established doctrine within the Supreme Court that commercial speech is not covered by the First Amendment. Now, I don't know if this current batch of conservatives, what their view of this is, but I suspect that they would uphold that precedent, unfortunately. And I don't have court cases to cite, but it's well known, I guess, that is the positioning of the Supreme Court. Because all these regulations, and it's not just the financial industry, every industry suffers from regulations that you could argue are clearly violations of First Amendment. And many cases have gone to the Supreme Court around this, and they've ruled against business. So I'm not holding my breath.
Yeah, I wouldn't expect too much optimism on that one.
Yeah, sadly, I'm not. So, all right, Ryan.
Thanks, Yaron. First, I want to say thank you for your encouragement to add more art into our lives. I've been trying to listen to more classical music, and I've really been enjoying it. And one thing I notice is I tend to get more out of the music if I watch a performance on YouTube, and especially if I pay attention to the conductor and two-part question. Can you give any insight for us beginners on the role a conductor plays and the way a piece ultimately ends up sounding, or any specific techniques to look out for? And then in particular, one of the conductors I've enjoyed watching is Gustavo Dudamel. And I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on him or any other conductors.
He is quite a showman. So he's fun to watch. I saw him, I think, a couple of times live with the LA orchestra that he's the chief conductor of. I mean, this is a perfect question for Thomas Schubottom, who is a conductor, and who I did a thing on music recently for ARI Europe, because I know nothing about the technicalities associated with music. But let me just first say about watching the music. I think the key there is that it's probably helping you focus. That is, we're so used to visual cues that it's hard for us to just focus on non-visual cues. So the visual helps us focus on the music. I mean, I think over time you'll find you don't need the visual, and you might even find that the visual is distracting, which I sometimes find that it is. And I can give you some cues on how to improve your focus when you don't have a visual cue, how to use auditory cues to focus on the classical music. I'll do that in a second. But in terms of conductors, I mean, the conductor determines a lot of things. Now, this is non-technical. This is me just rambling based on my understanding. So none of this is technical musicology or anything like that. But when a composer writes the music on a sheet of music, he might give certain instructions to how he wants it played. But there's still a lot of room in terms of interpretation. The relative volume of the different instruments, for example, the relative emphasis on different instruments, the exact rhythm, the speed at which it is played. Things like that are what the conductor, the pauses, how long the pause should actually be, how intensely should the music come in after pause or come in right at the beginning of a piece. So what you will see is that conductors make a huge difference. Once you know a piece, you'll notice that the differences are really vast between conductors, particularly conductors of particular schools. Now, the conductors I am most familiar with, if you will, and most passionate about are conductors that conducted in an era where there's very little video of them. And if there is video, it's the sound is not very good on the video. So it's going to be hard to find in a video collection, but you can just take any piece that you know well, that you've listened to a number of times, and play it by 3 different conductors, and you'll start seeing the differences. If you look at a CD jacket of them, for example, or I guess on YouTube you can do the same thing. Look at how many minutes it takes them to complete a movement. Sometimes the differences are stunning in terms of how much slower one conductor will play a movement than another conductor. My favorite conductor of all time is an Italian conductor by the name of Arturo Toscanini, who older people would know the name because he was a rock star. I mean, the Beatles had nothing on Toscanini when he was at his peak, which was post-World War II in the United States. I mean, people would line up to get tickets to his concerts all over the US. He had his own orchestra, which was built just for him, called the NBC Symphony Orchestra, with the best musicians in the world, or he tried to get the best musicians in the world who were willing to play for him, because he was a perfectionist, and he demanded perfectionism of his musicians, and he would yell and scream until he got it. And he would force them to practice, and unions. He hated unions because unions wouldn't let the musicians work as hard as he wanted them to work. And he has a very different. You hear instruments that you didn't know existed, in a particular piece when you listen to some of his, and you hear a pacing that you can't imagine anybody would play at. So he's my favorite. I love his stuff. Now, it's hard to find good recordings because of when they were recorded. You can, even recordings of his for the 20s and 30s, where he was at his peak musically, but his recordings from the 40s and 50s, some of them are really good and amazing. So take a piece like Beethoven's Seventh Symphony, third and fourth movements. Take him and take another contemporary of his by the name of Furtwängler. Furtwängler was a great German conductor, but also will be remembered in infamy because he continued to conduct in Berlin during World War II for the Nazis. So he didn't leave Germany. He didn't refuse the Nazis. He cooperated with them, even though he was not sympathetic. He continued to work with them. If you take Furtwängler's way of playing Beethoven's Seventh and Toscanini's, you can see two extremes of it. Or take Brahms's Fourth, another one. Take another conductor by the name of Klemperer and Toscanini, and you can see the vast differences. To get into the details of what you just have to listen to them and hear them, and you will discover the differences. And that opens up, by the way, a whole world of different conductors, different instrumentalists. How does Jascha Heifetz play Tchaikovsky's Violin Concerto versus how, I don't know, a modern violinist plays it? Or how does Vladimir Horowitz play Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto? How did Rachmaninoff play Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto? Because there's a recording of Sergei Rachmaninoff playing his own piano concerto. It's a bad recording, but you can get a sense of how he played it versus other pianists who played it. Now, Rachmaninoff said that Horowitz played his piano concerto better than he did. So the standard is Vladimir Horowitz. How did he play it versus, and then the interaction between composer, conductor, and soloist, and you, on and on and on. And that's part of what makes classical music so rich. You've got the composition, and then you've got the various interpretations and the different orchestras, the different conductors. It's truly amazing. So it's a world. It's a whole universe, and you can spend an entire life, examining it, listening, discovering new things, and you will never get bored because there's so much of it. There's so much of it.
Thank you. That was helpful.
Sure. I'm glad you're enjoying it. All right, let's see. We've got two phone numbers. I'm just going to read their area code, 734. Area code 734. You can change the phone number to a name, to your name. There is a way to do that. All right, 734, you have to unmute yourself. Yeah. All right, no 734, not unmuting. Okay, 917. 917. There you go.
Hi, you're on.
Hey,
it's Andrew.
Hey, Andrew. How's it going? I should recognize your phone number by now.
I actually recorded my name this time. I'm doing something wrong. So I wanted to ask you about hedonism. One of the key points in objectivism is that happiness is the ultimate purpose. And you're, I think, the only public intellectual I know of who states very affirmatively that pleasure is good. And we know that is counter to altruism, that statement.
Yep.
And I've been thinking, it seems like if you look around, there's the two ways people approach pleasure is from an altruistic standpoint, with people denying themselves, like businessmen denying themselves pleasure from their achievements. And then the other side is people, kind of a thrill-seeking, hedonistic approach to pleasure. And I wonder if those two things are, two sides of the same coin. How do you think that morality is creating or impacts kind of a hedonistic mentality?
Well, because nobody wants to be an altruist. Almost nobody wants to be an altruist. And if you grow up and you don't want to be an altruist, and yet you also don't want to cause suffering on other people. You're not a monster. You don't want to see destruction. So you're not a nihilist. And you don't want to cause other people pain. Then the kind of out for you is, I mean, the two outs, and people, I think the better people become one of two things. I think one is better than the other, but the two outs are pragmatism, which almost every businessman is, because that's the out for morality. They become pragmatists, and then they feel a little guilty because they know they should be altruists. And the second, which inflicts, I think, primarily young people, is hedonism. It's devoting yourself to pleasure for pleasure's sake, without sacrificing other people to you, but without sacrificing yourself to other people, but sacrificing yourself to yourself, in a sense. That is sacrificing your future to your present. But it is, the culture does, in action, reject altruism. And it has to, but you need morality, you need guidance, you need something. So the only alternative they have is pragmatism, which says, I'll just get by, I'll do what works, and I won't concern myself too much with ethics, just at the margin, but not too much. Or this hedonism, and of course the real nasty people, the people who grew up wanting to break things and wanting to knock stuff down, become the nihilists. But those are the alternatives. They're all non-altruistic alternatives, but they're all, in a sense, the outcome of altruism. They're all what altruism leads to, as so you could argue that the hedonism of the Romans, right? Let's say the Roman aristocrats, was a consequence of not having a moral code, not knowing what to do. So if pleasure's good, let's go all in on pleasure, and to hell with the long term. Let's just embrace pleasure right now, and let's live by that. And that's what's so sad, and that's why it's so important to get people when they're young before they make some of these decisions, which sometimes are irreversible.
Yeah, it seems like it's definitely very much afflicts young people. And
because soon enough you discover that hedonism it does not lead to pleasure, does not lead to success, does not lead, and then I think they become either religious fanatics or they become pragmatists, right? So they either become pure real altruists or some form of religiosity, or they become pragmatists. Very few people stay hedonists for their entire life. Some do. I mean, you can find people who are, never left Woodstock, right? But that's a minority.
Yeah, there's very few people who get to the point, because I think you need objectivist morality for it to tie pleasure to long term.
Yes, that's right, and that's very difficult. So people wing it, they figure out something, but to actually have guidance, you need a philosophy, and objectivism is the only philosophy that does it. Great.
Thank you.
Thanks, Andrew. All right, let's try 734 one more time. All right, good.
Hi, you're on. This is Jennifer.
Hey, Jennifer. Sorry.
Hi.
Hey.
My phone wasn't working right. I wanted to ask about, you said that when you're in a classical concert, that people, they don't move around or they don't really react physically. And in popular music, people will move their bodies, dance, cry, whatever, respond emotionally. And isn't it more of an integration, like to, let's say, cry at a concert or something? Why do you think people at classical concerts tend to just sit there and not move or anything?
Well, a few things. I think one is it's an issue of the culture. Culture, has dictated that people sit very still and very focused. And many people, when they focus, are very still. So so it's part of it. So I'm not condemning everybody who sits still and at a concert. I just find it that I can't do it. And then I think there is a subsection of the audience. I don't know how large it is because it's hard to tell, that go to classical music, not because they love the music, not because it affects their soul, but because it's the thing you do if you're a cultured person. So they're faking it, and they're kind of bored out of their minds and sitting there bored out of their minds. And they've got an expression of people who are bored out of their minds. And they're not moving to the music because it doesn't move them. So I think the right balance is somewhere in between. I would like to see a few more bobbing heads. I would like to see a few hands trying, conducting a little bit, not too much, because you don't want to disturb other people, because there is an issue of classical music does require focus. And if you are too outrageous, like in a rock concert, you're not focusing, right? A rock concert, you're not focusing on the music. It's a happening. It's an experience. It's not about just the music. Classical music, a concert is about the music, so that you don't want it too much, because then it will distract people. But I just would like to get some sign of life from some of the people listening to the music.
Well, some people at rock concerts are concentrating on the music,
but it's hard because everybody's yelling next to you.
Well, if you're yelling or talking, no. But if you're paying attention,
yeah.
You could move around or sing or show emotion, and some people do are paying attention. But it is a different setting, so I know what you mean.
Yeah, it's very different. Great, thanks, Jennifer.
Thank you.
All right, let's do some super chat. We got some really. A lot of money came in today. Thank you. Thank you to all the super chatters. This is great, particularly to Michael and Troy. But Michael always comes in with a lot of good questions and some big dollars. So let's do two of Michael's $100 questions. If these idiots actually raise minimum wage to $10 an hour and keep sending out stimulus checks, will we have an economic catastrophe before Biden leaves office and the hard left will take all the blame? The reaction to that being a nationalist dictator from the right. Oh, Michael's just feeding into my pessimism, right? I mean, there is a chance. And I think the real danger of the 1.9 trillion, there was a Wall Street Journal article the other day that showed that the $1.9 trillion stimulus package will actually destroy, I can't remember how many millions of jobs, that literally it will destroy jobs. The minimum wage destroys more jobs. So I do think that the real risk that Biden is taking and other policies that his administration is going to engage in is to bring about a real recession that will bring about a real loss, both a loss for the Democrats. Now, in some regards, that's a good thing. In some regards, that's a terrible thing. And I'm not sure the hard left will take the blame. I think the centrists will take the blame. The hard left will still say, you didn't follow our hard left policies. You were too centrist. That's what caused the economy to collapse. So what I think is going to happen is you'll get a spurt of economic growth this year, early next year, as all this money gets absorbed in the economy. People shrug off COVID and go to work and get stuff done, and suddenly production spikes. And as a consequence, you get this boost in production. And that'll happen. But then all the bad economic policies will kind of hit. And then and the Fed will have to raise interest rates because inflation will stop peaking, will start rearing its ugly head. And then you get a big recession sometime in 2022, just before the elections. And maybe that's the one shot Republicans have of taking the House. Now, in spite of how bad the Republicans are, I still hope they take the House, if only to be a counterbalance to Biden. So maybe that's a good thing. I don't know that the Republicans are quite ready yet for a nationalist dictatorship, or that the country's quite ready yet. So, but yeah, I mean, this is the kind of ping pong. This is kind of back and forth that we can expect moving into the future. I mean, as the culture deteriorates, as the culture is getting worse, as things are really, really bad, the alternatives become worse and worse. The options become worse and worse. And the outcome ultimately has to be a bad outcome. And that's the direction we're heading. It's no question. Exactly the path we take is hard to tell, but it is true, as you say, that it is going to be, to some extent, determined by the economic policies. And so we know Biden's economic policies are not good. There is a chance that they're going to lead to a kind of recession that will cause a political shift again in the country away from the Democrats. All right, the second question was, anyone who reads Ayn Rand and doesn't have a positive emotional response is worse than useless. They don't even have a soul to save. There's a sense in which that's right. Although I do know people, and this is, I think it's weird, but it is true. I do know people who read her novels, didn't get that emotional response, read a nonfiction, got excited by it. So people were more repressed, rationalistic, and then only years later reread the novels and got the emotional response after, in a sense, they had changed the psychology or the integration of mind and body. So I wouldn't rule out people completely, but yeah, to me, if you don't respond to Atlas Shrugged, what are you going to respond to? You're not going to respond to me. What is it that's going to bring it about? Because my emotional response was so powerful. Now, the other flip side of that is I know a lot of people respond. Actually, that's not anyway, we'll get to his other question. I know a lot of people who respond positively, emotionally to Ayn Rand, and then never pick it up, never do anything more with it. And that is also bewildering. And that, I think, is a sign, to some extent, of intellectual cowardice, not wanting to follow through, not wanting to figure out what's really going on here, not wanting to figure out what really she represents, what's really behind this great novel. All right, Michael's second question. Our culture is so evil. You're in a good mood today, Michael. Our culture is so evil. They'll make fun of anyone for any reason, as long as they take something seriously. They're targeting people looking for meaning in life. Those are the people they want to destroy. That fact discourages many young, excited objectivists. I agree completely. It's one of the reasons people ask me, Yaron, why do you hate The Simpsons? Because I really do hate The Simpsons. And why do you hate, what was that other cartoon that's really funny that somebody
Family Guy.
What's that? No, Family Guy. I wouldn't even watch. No, the one written by a couple of libertarian types.
South Park.
South Park. Thank you, South Park. I don't like South Park. Now, I like certain episodes. They're so funny. How can you not? But I don't like South Park because the whole point of South Park is to make fun of pretty much everything. Now, I know aficionados of South Park tell me that, yes, there is some values that they actually do stand by and represent. Maybe. But I would say that the dominant sense that we have gotten from South Park, Simpsons, probably the show that Jonathan mentioned, and much of the culture generally, much of our comedy, much of our other movies, the anti-hero movies, or is a culture of cynicism and skepticism. A culture that, you're absolutely right, makes fun of anybody who takes ideas seriously, who wants to knock down idealism no matter what the ideals are, that wants to betray them, stab them in the back, make fun of them, destroy them in one way or another. And you see that over and over and over again in popular culture. And I find that really despicable. And now some ideas are worth knocking down, but if all you do is knock down, then you're sending a certain message, particularly young people who watch this stuff incessantly. This is all they watch, right? Because it's funny and it's entertaining. And some of it is true in a sense that you're knocking down stuff that's true, good to knock down. But if you're not presenting anything positive, then what stays with that young person? The knocking down and the evil of idealism, the evil of ability, the evil of success. When Josh Hawley says, break big tech up, break them up with a viciousness in the name of the people, it's just ugly nihilism spewing out, right? Now, he has an agenda. He's doing this in the name of an ideal, but that's a scary ideal. But young people are going, yes, we've always wanted to smash stuff, right? That's what we were taught. To be cynical, skeptical of success, be cynical, skepticism of ideals. Now, so that is the kind of nihilism that I think has infiltrated even better people. Even better people have that cynicism in them. And cynicism is a great evil. It's a great, great, great evil. Yeah, it is sad, and you see it all over the place. You see it all over the place, and that's the real enemy. It's much bigger than the socialists, because I think a lot of people on the left make fun of the socialists because the socialists actually believe in something. They've got an ideal. That's kind of funny. A universal ideal. I mean, these people make, I mean, the far left, in the sense that they're pure cynicism, skepticism, pure nihilism, make socialists look like the good guys. So yes, we live, I've often said this, we live in the best of times materially, from a opportunities perspective, from a self-actualization perspective, and the worst of times from a cultural perspective. The only way to live a good life is to be self-contained, in a sense. Seek out the better shows. This is why I think I mentioned there were a couple of TV shows recently that I was shocked by the lack of cynicism. Ted Lasso, was it Lasso? I think it was Ted Lasso, something like that, on Apple TV, which is about this American football coach who goes to England and coaches soccer, and it's a comedy, and you think that it's just going to make fun of this guy, and it's just going to make him look ridiculous, and it's just going to make fun of Americans, and it's going to put down American, and it doesn't. He's funny, and some of his stuff is ridiculous, but it's not made fun. It's not undermining him. He's actually a kind of heroic character. He's kind of cool. And America's portrayed as a good place, not a bad place. And the same with another show about this marketing executive who goes to Paris. And it makes fun of the Parisian sense of skepticism and cynicism. It's like, who are these people in Hollywood who greenlit these projects, who wrote the scripts, where there's an idealism there? It's, it's not objectivist. It's not great, but it's like America's a cool place. Individualism is good. And having your own ideas and having a different way of doing things is a good thing. And these Europeans are kind of stuck up, cynical bastards. Wow. I mean, that Emily in Paris. Thank you. Emily in Paris and Ted Lasso. And it's like, who made these shows? It's like shocking. So once in a while you see, or I don't know if you saw Mr. Jones, the movie, anti-communist movie, right? Made by a Polish director, granted not by an American one. But I'm always struck and positive when I see art and movies and TV shows that are not cynical, because I think that is a good cultural sign, a really, really good cultural sign. But it goes against the current grain, but it's little signs like that suggest maybe we're having an impact. Maybe there's some early signs that things can get better, that the culture might have changed. Remember, the culture will change in some ways decades before the politics changes, or the early signs of cultural change will happen way before the politics changes. So somebody asked if my favorite comedian is Borat. I hate Borat. The whole premise of Borat's humor is to make people look ridiculous. And you can make anybody look ridiculous. You think you would stand up to a well-crafted Borat? Easily make you look ridiculous in some capacity. But that's the whole point. It's not to elevate anything. It's not to improve anything. And it's not to make ridiculous just vice. It's to make everybody and anybody ridiculous. Right? Now, the piece on Giuliani, I have to admit, I enjoyed, because I hate the guy so much that if you want to make anybody look ridiculous, you want to make Giuliani look ridiculous, I will cheer. But yeah, not my. I mean, they're trying to figure out who my favorite comedian is. Good question. I like Chaplin. I didn't like Lauren and Hardy. Too stupid in a sense. I like the Marx Brothers. I didn't like what do you call the other guys? What do you call the guys who hit each other in the head?
The Three Stooges.
Three Stooges. Never liked the Three Stooges. That's like more like Lauren and Hardy. But I like the Marx Brothers. And then I liked humor from about 20 years and previous. I like British humor. I liked Faulty Towers is one of my favorite shows ever. Faulty Towers. I liked a lot of those. A lot of that period's British TV shows, comedy. But I hate American humor from the last, I don't know, 30 years. Ever since the turning point in American humor for me was Dumb and Dumber. And since then, it's only gotten Dumb and Dumber. So that is how bad it is. Oh, wait, quick. We'll do a couple of quick other ones, and then we'll go back to our panel. When you give talks to leftist college students, you're patient with them when making the case for your ideas. Would you say that you are as patient on your show with people who are coming from the right? Should you be? No, I'm not. No, I'm not. And partially it's the medium. But was I patient? So if you've watched my rant about sweatshops, was I being patient with that person? If you watch my rant about the NHS, when I tell them that the NHS is their God, and was I patient with that person? Or the communist who tells me about the wonders of communism. There's a little clip of me. I mean, my best rants in Q&As at lectures are when I'm tired, fed up, and pissed off. And then I deliver my best rants. Now, it's an interesting question. Why am I so impatient with people on my show? Oh my God, my sister's on the SuperChat. Hi, Leora. Isn't it late? No, I guess not. Not too bad. All right. Yes. Did we watch Faulty Towers together? You must have been very, very, very young. That was a long time ago. All right. That was a surprise. All right. So what was I saying? Why do I get more pissed off? Probably because I expect more from you. Probably because I expect people, when they hear, to have a context. Maybe that's a false expectation. And maybe because in the super chat, the way it's presented in the chat, it's more personal. But that is probably not a good thing. So I'm not saying that's positive. Part of and I'm not sure if my rants in front of students are are more patient. They strike me. It depends, right? And I guess my best rants, and maybe I've learned from my best rants that the thing that goes viral, the thing that leads to the greatest success, is when I'm super passionate and super aggressive and clear about my position. But it is true that this is a different medium, and none of my rants on my show have gone viral in the same way that my rants in front of a live audience have gone. So that's a good question. Good for me to think about. And maybe I should tone it down. I mean, Brad Thompson, my friend, I've had Brad on the show a number of times, has often told me that I would get a lot more listeners on the show if I dialed the show down. If I was more relaxed, if I answer the questions like I do in a Q&A at a thing. And Nick is shaking his head. No, don't do that. And so I think the audience is split, right? But on the other hand, I am open to suggestions because while the audience constantly grows, it only grows fast after I do like a Lex or Dave Rubin or Ben Shapiro interview. It doesn't grow fast generally. It doesn't grow fast just by itself. So and plus this is a lot more fun. Me yelling is a lot more fun for me. Okay. We've got a bunch of super chat questions. Let's hold off on super chat question for now, because we're going to be here for like 2.5 hours at this rate. So let me do one more round with the panel, and then we'll finish up with the super chat questions we have, particularly the $20 and above ones, and then we'll call it a Sunday. All right. Well, the order is changed. We're going to start with Emmett. And by the way, that's a beautiful Bierstadt painting behind you.
Thank you. Yeah. So I'm wondering if you could comment on the whole Josh Whedon thing. I know you've talked a number of times about being a fan of Firefly, and that's one of my favorites. Yep. And he's been in the news lately. I don't know if you've been following that or not. I'm having a tough time figuring out just exactly what people are upset with him about. I mean, obviously having affairs on his wife is a bad thing, but he doesn't sound like he's abused anybody in a sexual way or anything like that. So I'm confused, and I'm hoping you could clarify.
So it sounds like on set, he is, I think the technical term is, an asshole.
Right. That's kind of how I read it too, which does not.
He puts down people. He told the lead actress on some nasty things to the lead actress on Buffy the Vampire Killer, who people who've watched love that show. I mean, really love that show.
Sure.
So he treats people really, really badly. And from a management perspective, not a good thing, probably.
Right.
On the other hand, he's brilliant. He is a genius. I mean, from what I can tell, he's a brilliant TV director. He's made some amazing shows that people love. The only one I really love is Firefly, although I did like the one he did after that, which I forget its name, kind of a science fiction one. But they are big fans to everything he has done. And when I look back, when I think about it, most geniuses in the past have been, I don't know if most geniuses, that's probably wrong. A lot of geniuses have been assholes, right? The stories about Hitchcock in the movies, he made some of the greatest movies ever made, and yet he was not an easy person to work with. And in today's sense, he was not nice and abusive, right? Abusive verbally. Right? And I think Josh has been abusive verbally. Now, it's not good to be abusive verbally. And I think one should be condemned for doing it. And I think people should put pressure on him to stop it. And producers should think about whether they want to work with him. And actors should think about whether they want to work with him. But it's not the same as sexual abuse. In a sense, it's not physical. It's not rape. It's not punching somebody in the nose. It is a different category. We as a culture are much more sensitive to it. I mean, as Jennifer says, Steve Jobs yelled at people. A lot of great CEOs of the past were not the most pleasant people to be around, right? They yelled. They had very high standards, tended to be perfectionists. And when people screwed up, they let them know they screwed up, and they didn't hold back, and they expressed their passion. I think if we blacklist people like that, then we're missing out on their genius. But it is reasonable to say to them, it's not appropriate for you to talk to me like that, right? So how do we find a balance between not wanting to destroy the genius that these people have, and not wanting to shun it, not wanting to marginalize it, and yet also expressing the fact that certain behaviors are not acceptable, particularly when you're talking about young people and the star Buffy. I think she was a teenager. I don't know how old she was, but she was fairly young, and he really put her down and treated her. On the other hand, he made a career. I don't know that she did anything with it, but she was a superstar as Buffy, and I'm sure made a lot of money. So I think we become overly sensitive as a culture. I think we risk turning down and turning away some of these passionate geniuses. And I think that would be a tragedy if we did. But we're talking about Josh Whedon. Somebody's asking who we're talking about. From stories, and I don't want to compare, but from stories, Ayn Rand used to yell at people. And when she wasn't happy with Leonard or others, she made it very clear that she was not happy with them. I think generally people who are really, really smart just don't have the patience with other people's mistakes or some people or the behavior that they observe that they think is inconsistent with what is trying to be achieved. So I would be a lot more forgiving. We don't live in a culture that is willing to be forgiving. I think that's it's going to be part of the decline of the culture, unfortunately.
Great, thank you.
All right, Jonathan. Maybe it's also part of the fact that people don't like me not being nice to some of the people who, from the right, who ask questions on the thing. Look, I've said this before, and I'll say it now, and you guys can do it. I have zero patience for racists. I have zero patience for people who flirt with racism. I think the 20th century has taught us. I have zero patience for communists. I don't count all socialists as communists. I don't count all leftists as communists. I don't count college students as communists. But even college students flirting with racism, I have no patience for. Really, no patience for. So it's partially, if that is what's coming from the right, yeah, you're going to hear from me because I find it, and it's part of my background that I probably can't get rid of. As I said before, I was born in the shadow, in the sense of the Holocaust. My parents were of the generation, and my friends' parents lived through the Holocaust. My parents would have if they'd lived in Europe. And I can't just shrug that off. Racism, I find to be so abhorrent and so disgusting that it brings out that kind of passion in me. And that is often, where these people are coming from the right. And I think they've all left. I haven't seen anybody like that on my chat for a while. So maybe I scared them off. Maybe that's a good thing. Jonathan.
I will skip this round for a moment and pass to the next one. Thank you.
Okay, Ryan.
Sure. So a question that I think is related to your GameStop commentary.
Sure.
Over the past several years, I've made a decent amount of money in political prediction markets. And I've reached a point where I'm pretty confident I can continue making money. And, you can get some pretty crazy, ridiculous odds out there. I was just wondering if you think there's any moral hazards or implications to making money this way, where you're not really providing value or producing anything.
No, I don't think it's bad to gamble and make money. I mean, I know a lot of people who make good money at 21, or certainly I know people who make money at poker. Why not, right? It's an activity that is entertaining to the people participating, hopefully. And I don't think there's anything wrong. Political prediction markets are good for you for being good at it. You have to take into account, because the odds are 50-50, because it's usually one or the other. It's quite possible to be both lucky, but it's also possible that you're just better at calculating the odds and better at making political predictions.
Yeah, just to give you an example, like the one political market I use, you could get like a high single-digit return on Trump winning the popular vote after the election happened. So,
Really?
It was basically free money at that point.
That is free money. Yes. Okay. Well, yes. Then it's your moral duty to participate in those markets and get that money out of the hands of those idiots. That's one way to view it, right? And
okay. Well, thank you. I'll try to continue doing that then.
keep doing it. So, yeah. I mean, yeah. I mean, people who are idiotic have too much money on their hands. And that is a good example of it. And I'd say the same thing at a poker table. A lot of times, the people playing the poker, and maybe it's me because I'm not a particularly good poker player, but a lot of the people playing poker with real pros, if they care about the money, they shouldn't be playing. And if they don't care about the money, then it's good that you take it from them. You're doing the rest of us a favor, I think. So, all right, Andrew.
Hi. Can you hear me? You're on?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. I wanted to ask you about, so I'm a supporter of ARI, and I think ARI does a good job. I mean, ARI might be doing a great job. I'm sure there's certain things that ARI could be doing better. So I'm not saying that ARI is above criticism. I just don't pay attention close enough, nor have a lot of the knowledge, I think, to, have opinions on what ARI is doing that are that firm. But it does strike me that I think one thing that it definitely raises a red flag to me when people are like, they hate ARI, because there's opinions that, could be fair either way, but to have that strong of a negative opinion on what ARI is doing is strange to me. And I think that one of the factors that might happen with people is that they're frustrated, and this probably increases as a person gets older. They want an objectivist society. We all want an objectivist society. And it becomes clear, that in your lifetime, in my lifetime, and probably everybody who's listening to this podcast lifetime, that's not going to become a reality. That hopefully we can move it more towards objectivism. But, Atlas Shrugged or Gulch is not going to manifest in our lifetimes. And I think that, some people are just, it creates a certain desperation in some people because they want that. And that seems to me like maybe not the right psychological posture towards the whole issue, and thinking that one controls things that one just doesn't control. I mean, we are where we are in this philosophical culture, and we just don't control people. We don't control a lot of the dynamics that need to occur. And I wonder, what do you think about that? And what do you think is the healthy outlook on that issue of bringing about objectivism into a culture in our lifetimes when we probably won't see it manifest, certainly not fully?
Yeah. So yeah, I definitely agree with that. I don't think it's a full story, but I definitely think that part of the motivation for people who denounce ARI and hate ARI is frustration with it's not moving fast enough, right? And we want it to be faster, and we want it to be. And where do they want to see it? Where they want to see it in politics, and we're not seeing it in politics. Therefore, you failed, and therefore something else has to be done. So I think there's definitely that, and that is primarily common among older people. I think there's among younger people, there's the notion of, and I see it right now on the chat. There's the notion of we know how to change the culture. They know how to change the culture, and ARI is not doing what we think it should do, and therefore they're lousy because they're not doing what we think they should do, and we know, right? Because we're young, and we when we're young, we think with certainty that we know how the world works exactly, and we know without any question that we could achieve the things that our elders can't. And then there are people who are just ignorant. They have no clue what AOI is doing. But because AOI has taken a political position that they oppose, or because it's taken some other position, or because they met somebody who they don't like from AOI, they are not interested in learning more about AOI. So I've seen it all, right? And then there are people who just, there are a lot of people out there who think there's one thing, that if you just did this one thing, the world would change like that. So there's very little understanding of how a culture changes in the world out there among young, old, and middle, and people in the middle. Right? So some people, somebody says here, AOI is not willing to take on the establishment left in a meaningful way. I mean, where do you live? That's all AOI does, is take on this stuff. What is distributing Ayn Rand's books into high schools if not taking on the establishment left and right? But what is funding positions for objectivist philosophers in academia? But the Ayn Rand Institute is an objectivist organization. That's the other thing. Everybody wants us to get into politics.
Yaron, they want AOI to be militant.
To what?
And I think that they want AOI to be militant.
Yes, they want it to be militant, but in a political sense, right? And they want AOI to be militant in a political sense, which would, and they want us to affiliate with people who we don't want to affiliate with, because it's really, really, really bad for us to affiliate, for example, with Trump and with the right. So they want everything. But I think you're absolutely right. I think a healthy attitude towards cultural changes, to understand what it requires, to study a little bit of history, just a little bit of history, to look at how the Enlightenment comes about from the rediscovery of Aristotle in the 14th century, and how it goes through a Renaissance and the kind of the cultural changes that happen to bring about Enlightenment, or how Immanuel Kant's ideas filter into the culture, how Marx's ideas filter into the culture, and to look at that and to think about how you would try to do it in the world today, realizing the radicalness of Ayn Rand's ideas. And a lot of people, this other thing, a lot of people don't realize how radical objectivism is. I mean, when I was first read Atlas Shrugged, I thought if only I argued with everybody, they would get it, because these ideas were so clear in my head, they were so obvious in my head, that anybody who I exposed these ideas to would get it immediately. It goes back to this idea that people, I mean, how come they don't respond positively to Atlas Shrugged? That's all it took for me, right? So I projected on everybody else. So people project that. So there are many psychological reasons. And one of the things is, and this is the culture of the right is very much this, and I think most people who criticize the Institute are of the right in a sense. There's no respect for expertise. Like there's no respect for. So I mean, one of the things that I find most insulting about much of this is this idea that the Institute doesn't have a strategy, or they don't know what they're doing or whatever. But that's a direct insult at me, right? That means I've never thought about strategy. I've never sat down and done a strategy session. I've never, the Institute doesn't have a plan. So when I first was introduced to objectivism, and I would read something by Leonard Peikoff or one of the objectivist intellectuals, and it didn't quite make sense to me, my response was not, well, he's an idiot, or he doesn't know what he's talking about. My response was, how come I don't get it? Let me look deeper into this, because I'm probably wrong, right? It wasn't the assumption, and I'm not comparing myself to Leonard Peikoff, but a certain respect for the other person, that doesn't exist. So if somebody notices the Institute is doing something and they don't agree with it, the first response that I often get is, well, they don't know what they're doing. They're obviously a bunch of idiots. Right? Rather than, I wonder why they're doing it. Right? Mm-hmm. Maybe I'm not seeing something. But that's the kind of attitude that young objectivists don't have. And then Our cynical culture doesn't allow it, and the right's attitude towards experts and expertise doesn't allow. So let me answer the last part of your question quickly, and then I have to go on because I have got so many questions. The right attitude to take is, I'm going to make my life the best life that it can be. I'm going to create a world for myself. I'm going to surround it with Whoops.
I am going to create a word for myself.
There is Siri.
Search the web for it.
Be quiet.
Siri's on board with your approach.
Siri's on board. Make a world for yourself. Figure out, make you the best version of yourself first. Then actively help promote the ideas. The institute are the experts at that. Grant them, at least until they prove otherwise, that. Support them. And promote the ideas in the way you live and to the best of your ability within the life around you. And evaluate objectively the world around you and the expectation with regard to whether it can be successful or not. I don't think you're going to have an objectivist world in anybody who's listening to this show's lifetime. But I do think that some of you will see a much better world than we have today. As I said, I think the change is gradual, just like the change from Thomas Aquinas to the Enlightenment. And in the middle, it might be brutal. You might have a 30-year war or a 100-year war. But the end result is the Enlightenment. The end result is the establishment of America. So I think some people on this listening now will see the world be significantly better, moving in a good direction. But they're going to be ups and downs. And to blame every up and down on the institute. Another thing about Einstein Institute, last thing, and then which is the Einstein Institute has a mission that no institute in the world has ever had. There was no institute for establishing an enlightenment. There was no institute for establishing the Renaissance. There was no institute for changing the world when the world changed. So to some extent, we're trying to extrapolate how these things happened without guidance in the past to bring about that guidance. And we're going to make mistakes. Not everything we do is right. We might miss stuff. But it's, on the other hand, you can't have like a democracy where we go out and ask everybody, what's the best way to change the world? Let's vote on it. They're experts. They're doing it. You don't like what we're doing? Great. Do something else. And one of the things that you'll know when the world is changing is there'll be 50 organizations dedicated to different aspects of changing the culture in the direction of objectivism. So when I see competing organizations, including competing organizations I don't like, and you might know of some of those, it doesn't bother me. I actually think it's an inevitable path if we're ever going to be successful. With all these splits and schisms and people are going, inevitable. I mean, that's what happens with intellectual, any kind of intellectual movement. People disagree. And because it's an intellectual movement, they're passionate about their disagreements, and the disagreements are meaningful. They're important. All right. So go do your thing. Go express yourself in that way. We'll keep doing this. If we think you've done something so horrific, we'll condemn you. You guys on the sideline can make your own choices. You can decide that we condemn somebody too badly or not at all or too little or whatever. And you can go and do your own. I mean, let's have 20, 30, 50 different organizations out there in the world. And I encourage people to have their own podcasts and to do their YouTube channels and to try to promote these ideas to the best of their ability. I'm not trying to hold on to a monopoly. I am going to say that's wrong when I see something wrong. Not always. Sometimes I hold back, but generally the Institute is going to say that. And sometimes you won't like it. All right. That's my spiel on that for whatever it's worth. All right, Nick.
All right. Thanks.
Thanks, Andrew.
Yeah, Yaron. My question is on have liberals finally do they finally see the threat of the hard regressive lefts and how they embrace identity politics? So they want to shove, gender and race down our throats. They're anti-free speech. Have they come to any sort of strategy to take them on, or are they just gonna let them roam free? And from a cultural standpoint,
No, there's definitely an effort to rein them in. There's definitely a movement to rein them in among the, what do you call it, the old liberal kind of left.
right?
You see that in the Heterodoxy Academy that I think, what's his name, started at NYU. You see that with the, I subscribe to Substacks, and I get a lot of Substacks from kind of leftist intellectuals who hate the cancel culture and the critical race theory and all of that, but they're left of center. And there are a lot of them, and they're constantly debating and discussing what they can do about the far left. Now, Jonathan Haidt, thank you. Jonathan Haidt has the Heterodoxy Academy, and Jonathan Haidt is left of center. So there's definitely a growing movement of old style liberals. You saw that in that article, I forget the magazine that was published in, that condemned cancel culture sometime last year. And what they don't get, of course, is you have to offer an alternative. And as long as they're altruists or socialists, they don't have an alternative. But they at least get the value of free speech. And they get that what the far left is doing is destroying liberalism. And I have some hope, moderate hope, that there is a revival of kind of a classical liberalism, right? What the intellectual dark web was supposed to be, what Dave Rubin was trying to do, but then abandoned and embraced the right. I'd like to see kind of a new liberal, center liberal, classical liberal, people who respect free speech, people who respect debate, people who respect individual freedom, disagree maybe about economics, disagree maybe about some of the details, but generally believe reason is the way we resolve our disagreements. I think that's the only hope to slowing down what's happening, particularly on the left, but even on the right. We need an alternative to the left and right as they exist today.
All right, thank you.
Sure. All right. Daniel, have we done? We only did one, right?
Just one so far.
Yep.
First, quickly on ARI, I would say the majority of us that contribute every month. It's like a hedge fund. I don't give money to a hedge fund manager and then give him investment advice. Not going to happen. On Joss Whedon, have you seen Much Ado About Nothing, his remake of Shakespeare's?
I did, but I can't remember anything about it now. Remind me.
I really enjoyed it.
I think I really liked it, but I can't remember it. All I remember is I really liked it, but nothing more than that.
Yeah. Okay. Something he made that the writers union was shut down, everything, and he did it in his own home.
That's right. And he did it on a low budget kind of, and it's a very strange setting.
Yes.
Yeah, that's right. But it was very good.
So anyway,
I'm a sucker for Shakespeare, so it's easy to please me when it comes to Shakespeare.
Okay, fair enough. The question I have is back to racism. During the campaign, Biden said he wanted a commission to study reparations for slavery. Numbers have been suggested: $50,000 to $200,000 per Black family per one-time payment. You've generally said racism still exists, and people who are in minorities feel it. What kind of things should be done if you're born, white male, and you're hiring some people, firing some people, working in business? What kind of things should you do to do what you can to lessen racism today?
So I think on a personal level, I think it's first to recognize, even if you've never seen it, to recognize that there's at least a possibility that it exists out there, that these people are not just making this stuff up. I'm not talking about the crazy people, the critical race theory. I'm talking about the average Black person, Hispanic person who tells you, no, people have treated me in a racist way. So at first, recognize that it probably exists out there, and that they're sensitive about that, right? That it's an issue for them. It would be for you if somebody treated you based on in that way. It's the same, by the way, with sexism. Appreciate that some women really do experience it, and I wouldn't say traumatized by it, but it bothers them. It's a problem. It's not, even if it doesn't rise to harassment, it's not pleasant to be told that you're not going to be successful because you're a woman. That's horrible. Right? So be aware of it, be sensitive to it, make sure that you don't play into it by, so I don't use the N word. I hate the idea that I'm not using a word, but I don't use the F word either. So there's certain words I just don't use because I don't think they're civilized. I don't think they're appropriate. And I recognize that some people, they trigger them, and justifiably so. I don't think it's an unjustifiable thing. So be sensitive about these things and recognize that some people are going to be upset about certain things that you might not understand. But have a clear view of what racism actually is. And again, I've tried to define on the show many, many times what it is, because I see people. And what I try to do is try to avoid the identification by what's called race or by skin color and so on. Although it's hard, because some things you want to identify that way when you're talking about other people's identification. So particularly as a commentator, I can't avoid it. But I would never say white people are like this, right? But I might say people view white people like this because that's how they view them, right? So it's be sensitive to what it means to be racist or to, and then try to the best of your ability to be colorblind and live colorblindness. And I would say, given the history of this country with racism, and look, you can't deny that this country has a really, really bad history with racism. Now, you could argue other countries do as well. Okay, that doesn't make it any different. The fact that this country, fight it. I would support truly anti-racist causes. I don't know that there are any right now because of the corruption of the anti-racist movement by racists. But to the extent, I think it's a major cultural issue. I think it's a major, it is a major issue politically, and we need organizations. It used to be the NAACP. I don't think it is anymore. But we need organizations that will stand up against racism and argue against it and point out racists and go after them. Unfortunately, I don't know of any organizations like that today.
And certainly on the sexism side, I mean, as a financial trading company, we offer women more money than we do starting men, equal, college graduates, whatever. We can't attract them, right? We're a small company. We're not a Goldman Sachs. We don't have that clear direction forward. And they offer them, Goldman Sachs will offer a whole lot more money than we will for the women who go and get the degree that makes them eligible to be hired. I mean,
the fact is that not a lot of women graduating from finance and not a lot of women graduating from certain engineering fields like computer engineering, which is unfortunate because there's no reason there shouldn't be more women. And I think that has to do with certain issues with how we educate them. But yeah, I mean, it's actually, I think, particularly with women, it's actually beneficial to a work environment to have some women in. I would rather have some women in my company than not have them. I just think it's more interesting. So I would go out of my way with an equal, if I had equal abilities to get the woman rather than the man, just because it's more interesting. The difference makes it interesting.
And my point is, we got to go back somehow at the junior high level or whatever and get them interested in math and science and engineering and finance and those things, because they aren't going through the system. They
I know. And that's part of the problem with Silicon Valley. It's not that they are sexist, it's that there's just not enough women engineers coming out of the system to hire.
Yeah.
And nobody's really addressing why that is and how do we deal with that problem. But it's a cultural issue. It's a expectations issue. But yeah, we should, somebody says, let women do what they want. Of course, but don't discourage them from doing it. Don't set up a system that basically tells them you're not good at math, or you're never going to get a job in Silicon Valley, you never get a job as a physicist. That's what happens, unfortunately. And that is, if it was just, if you weren't dealing with children, then I would say, yeah, I mean, let them do what they want. But you're dealing with children and you're guiding those children in ways that I think are unhealthy. And I do think that exists. I mean, I still know, parents who dramatically, intellectually treat their daughters differently than their sons.
Thanks.
All right, let's see. Naveen.
Hey, Ron. It's a foreign policy question, and a couple quotes on what the founding fathers said, and your opinion on how that's different in today's world, and if it's not, but if it is, in what way. George Washington said, while we should extend economic ties with other nations, we should maintain as little political connection with them as possible. And John Quincy, this is a quote from him. He says, America as a nation, she does not go abroad in search of monsters to destroy. And while she is a well-wisher of freedom and independence of all, she is a champion and a vindicator only of her own. Right. So how do you think is that same today in today's world, or different, and in what ways?
No, I mean, nothing about that is the same today was. And I'm a huge supporter of that attitude. That is, I've said this often, I wouldn't have an embassy in Beijing. I wouldn't have an embassy in Moscow. I wouldn't have an embassy in Riyadh. Bring all those diplomats home. Why are we even talking to these monsters? We shouldn't be engaging with them at all until and unless they violate America's rights. And then we should crush them, right? And then come home. We shouldn't be there to establish democracies and teach them. But from afar, we should be a shining beacon on a hill for them to model. So that's the equivalent of John Quincy Adams' statement. I agree with John Quincy Adams in that sense. But we do the opposite. We're in everybody's life. We're involved with anybody. We should defend the shipping lanes for free trade. We should have zero tariffs in America. And we should tell anybody who attacks us that they will be crushed and destroyed, and otherwise leave the world alone. That would be my fault.
Is that the same with our allies, countries like Israel?
Yeah, our allies, we should form alliances with our allies to help protect the shipping lanes and help protect us from terrorists and things like that. But yeah, I mean, we shouldn't be telling the French what they should or shouldn't do, but I think we should have diplomatic relationship with them, because there are certain things that we should be discussing, but it should be minor, because business should be free and other things should be free. And the government, what issues are the government involved in? Very few in a free society. In the days of John Quincy Adams, what did the government have to do? Very little.
Right. So if you're not involved, how about declaring things? For example, government proclaiming that we're against Chinese violating.
We should definitely do that. So that's where we are an example, a moral example. So we say, we think the way Saudi Arabia treats women is horrific. There are standards, individual rights. We feel bad for the individual rights of the Saudis. We're not going to do anything about it, but we want to let you know that's having a moral, a moral perspective on the world. And I think it's important to make those declarations.
Okay, thank you.
And about Hong Kong and about, I wouldn't go to war, but making it clear to them. All right, Roy.
Again, before I ask my question, I want to say something about Josh Whedon, since we're on a Josh Whedon roll, the sub-theme of today. In in addition to the the TV series Firefly, there was, of course, the sequel, the film Serenity. Now, Yaron, have you seen Serenity? I don't remember whether you've actually
Yes,
seen it.
I've seen Serenity.
Okay, there's one scene in it, one moment that is such a wonderful example of the anti-humor, the sly humor of Josh and his collaborators, that it's easy to miss it. Do you remember the scene in which the Serenity sends a delegation to the Mr. Universe and his moon?
No, I don't.
Okay, I'll be very brief. Mr. Universe is not some buff, male specimen. He's a guy who happens to have the technology and the ability to hack any computer system in the universe. And the Serenity needs some information. They say, we'll go to visit him. So they send a small delegation. And he's living alone on his moon, except now he has this blonde bombshell of an android living with him.
I remember this, yes, yeah.
And she seems to live in his bed and nowhere else, in his bed on the moon. And he said, oh no, but we were actually married. And he shows the equivalent of an 8mm home movie of the wedding.
Yeah, I remember this.
And okay, and there's in these few seconds, you see him stepping forward and then stamping his foot on the napkin wrapped glass.
Yep.
And there's the most traditional Jewish wedding.
Yep.
And it's just so silly, so the preposterous that 500 years from now on a moon, God knows where, and he's living, his marriage with an android was sanctified by stepping on a glass. Anyway, and it passes by easy to miss. And I just think that that's what's so great about it.
It's a great movie. The movie is an excellent movie, I think, and a great ending to the whole show. I wish it continued, but it was a really, really good ending to Firefly.
Yeah. So now the question, are you familiar with Maxwell Goldberg?
No.
Okay. He was a guest on Alex Epstein's most recent Power Hour. He's very young. He's an entrepreneur and an engineer. And they were discussing the what he considers the dangerous American dependence on China for some material that's vital to American civilization.
Yep.
And in his discussion of that, rare earths was one of them, or a series of them. But in his discussion, he was making a contrast between China's long-range strategy, foreign strategy, and Russia's also, and the United States, which appears to have no strategy whatsoever, just little differences, perhaps. You should call it a foreign policy would be an exaggeration. I found it extremely interesting. And I would encourage you to watch that, his most recent Power Hour, because I would love to hear. I would love to hear what you think of it. That's my question. What do you think?
People who think the Chinese have this master, I mean, there's no question they're more strategic than we are. Absolutely, because we have no strategy, zero, no foreign policy, zero, no thinking going on when it comes to the future, none whatsoever among our foreign policy people. But the idea that the Chinese do, I mean, they have a strategy, but that it's good and that it's efficacious and that it's going to lead to the results that they want is giving authoritarian central planners way too much credit, is just my general view of people who argue that. And that's certainly true of Russia, where I don't think Russia has a strategy other than weakness in the West and exploiting that weakness. But China is going to discover that whatever strategy it has, it's not going to work.
Well, I'd be very much interested after you hear him.
I will.
In your arguments or different position or whatever. Yeah.
I'll take a look. Good. Thanks, Roy. All right. I think George hasn't asked a second question. I think then you guys can let me know if there's anybody else. I think I've caught everybody.
Yeah, I'll just make two quick TV recommendations since we've brought up a lot today. I don't know if you've watched Schitt's Creek or Kim's Convenience on Netflix.
I like Kim's Convenience. Kim's Convenience is wonderful. It's
and it's more South Korean inspiration. I don't know what it is about South Korea these days. Schitt's Creek, though, I think that's probably the best comedy maybe in my lifetime, specifically because they never go cynical. They never tell a single joke that comes at somebody's expense or somebody's hurt. Okay. And they just resist the temptation at every turn to go cynical or schmaltzy or Hollywood BS. And the ending was impeccable. So 2 really good comedies, both out of Canada, which is kind of strange, I guess. But one
of my favorite shows all time on television was Canadian. It was called Slings and Arrows, which I highly recommend. It's a Canadian show about a theater company putting on Shakespeare plays, Slings and Arrows. Yes, I really like Kim's Convenience. I really enjoyed that. Look up Schitt's Creek. That sounds great. Thanks for the recommendation. All right, we got a bunch of Super Chat questions. We're going to go through these, unfortunately, pretty quickly. All right, you called hip hop a low form of art. Yes, I have. Have you done enough of a survey of hip hop to say this? I think so. You said you who listen to hip hop are rebelling arbitrarily. Do they have nothing to legitimately rebel over in the culture? Sure, but you have to have something to rebel for. And so rebelling for the sake of what? What are you rebelling for the sake of? Again, I think that a music is primarily focused on a beat. And this is true of rock, and it's true of pop, and it's certainly true of hip hop. I think is not great music. It's just not sophisticated. It's going nowhere. It's a beat, right? Now, maybe it's good dance music. I don't know, but in terms of music, it's just not interesting. Now, is there poetry there? Are some of their rhymes poetic? I don't know. I know some people who think they are fine, but it's just not great in terms of art, in music. Now, the poetry, I have no opinion about. I can't understand a word they say anyway, right? And I admit that when you apply the hip hop kind of style to Hamilton, the musical, it comes across fine. But is Hamilton done hip hop as good as Hamilton done as an opera or an operetta? I don't think so. Musically. Now, maybe it appeals to more people, no question, but Hamilton is also, I think, a good sign in the culture, because I thought it was quite positive in terms of most of it. There were a few sections that I didn't like, but most of it. Could it be that many young people grow up in horrible circumstances in this culture and find solace in the music of hip hop artists who condemn those horrible circumstances to show people a positive way forward? Do they show them a positive way forward? Is the language of hip hop, the language of many hip hop, a language of violence, the language of rape, the language of sexism, the language of racism? Is it a positive way forward? Is the music in itself presenting young people with the best possible for them in the future? Is it helping them get out of the culture, or is it helping them sink into the culture? Is it helping them rise above their culture, or is it admiring them in the mud of their culture? I haven't seen a positive impact of hip hop. Now, I don't, again, maybe I'm missing something, right? But to me, hip hop is much more represents not elevating yourself, not making yourself better. Yes, seeking money, but seeking money not through productive activity, but just seeking money for the sake of money. I understand that people are hurting. I understand that people that come from a horrible, lousy culture. The way to elevate them from that culture is to present them with better culture. Martha Collins, who was this teacher in a black neighborhood in Chicago, whose students all went to college and did phenomenally well. And even though they didn't start out that way, I don't think would have played them hip hop. I think she would have taught them about classical music. So I don't think that thumping sound that is at the root of hip hop elevates the mind, elevates the consciousness, elevates the culture. Now, granted, I could be wrong. You said that the music of Bob Dylan resonates with you when you were young. Can you imagine something similar for young people today who listen to hip hop and that this is a positive thing for them? I doubt that the hip hop is as good as Bob Dylan. Maybe it is. And yeah, I get why it resonates with young people. But did Bob Dylan elevate me? No. Did Bob Dylan improve my culture? No. Luckily, I was on a path of elevating my own culture anyway, in my own life anyway. And Bob Dylan helped me through some rough patches. But did Bob Dylan elevate me? He didn't. He can't, because he has no solutions. He has no answers. All he has is problems. All he has is life sucks. So when life sucks, that resonates with you. But what is the solution to life sucks? It's not the same old, same old. Jeremy says, just as a follow-up to this, there are 3 or 4 hip-hop artists who are definitely positive. And that's great. The rest are not so good. I don't think you're aware of the good artists. And that's possible. But I'm not, first of all, I don't know anybody, and maybe I'm wrong, Jeremy, but I don't know anybody who knows enough about the art of music to be able to determine who a good artist is versus not. Even when I talk about classical music, I'm doing it not from the perspective of great art, because my sense is it's great art, but I can't prove that. So I don't know what good artists is when it comes to hip hop. I don't know if there is such a thing. Maybe there's some people with a positive message, but whether the art is good is not the same thing. You can't confuse the message with the aesthetic value. I don't know what the aesthetic value is. Again, given the simplicity, given the focus on rhythm, given the focus on a certain mindlessness to the music itself, I don't know that you can be a good artist and be in hip hop. But you can have a positive message and be in hip hop. Great. That doesn't make the art good. And it's still 3 or 4 out of the hundreds of hip hop artists. Obviously, the hundreds dominate that culture. And one of the reasons I think the culture among Blacks, not about all Blacks, but the culture, the dominant culture within Black communities is not a good culture. It's not a healthy culture. It's not a culture that promotes productiveness, self-responsibility, and reason, thinking. It's not a culture that supports smart kids who want to go into science and math. They're called white. That culture is not a healthy culture. And I think hip hop is part of that. Even if there are 3 or 4 hip hop artists who have a positive message. That's my view. And I think it was your question, maybe not, but somebody said, I wasn't talking about racist when I asked the question about people from the right. Then I'm not sure what you were talking about. I don't think I'm that impatient with people, except people who I expect more from. People who present themselves as objectivists who then say things that I think are ridiculous, or people who supported everything that Trump did, found a justification for everything Trump did. I had no patience for that. I admit it, because that expressed this type of mindlessness that I was horrified by. And again, the mindlessness is not for everybody who supported Trump, just those people who justified everything that he did. And yeah, I get passionate, get excited, and put people in, sometimes I probably do it inappropriately. And sometimes I'm even known to apologize when I do. So I'm not sure of whom you talk, but yes, certain people I'm more impatient of. Certain points of view I'm more impatient of. Listen to the lyrics of Pete Townsend, positive stuff. Yeah, I mean, there's lots of positive lyrics. That doesn't make the music good or likable by me. Rush had great lyrics. I mean, lyrics inspired by Ayn Rand. It doesn't do anything to me, for me. It's me. Did Rand ever comment on due process and criminal justice system, specifically the phenomena of obviously guilty criminals freed on technicalities? Is this simply the cost of having rights respecting court system? No, I think there's definitely an abuse of due process. I can't remember if Ayn Rand commented on this directly. I know that other objectivist intellectuals have. Yeah, I mean, I think if a policeman gets evidence in an inappropriate way, the evidence should still be admissible and a policeman should be penalized. So you don't ignore the evidence, but you also don't ignore the fact that the policeman broke the law. So yes, there is definitely a real problem with the way due process is interpreted in the modern court system, and I think evidence is evidence, no matter how it's attained. But if it's attained in an illegal way, then there should be consequences. In a rational world, would California be more expensive than the rest of the country because of high demand, or would supply meet demand? So cost of living was like the rest of the United States. Also, Dvorak's 8th or 9th. California would be more expensive only to the extent that supply is so parts of California would be more expensive because supply in those parts would be limited by the geography of it. So there's certain parts of San Francisco, there's certain parts by the coast that are unique, special, hard to replicate, and difficult to match supply and demand because there's only so many houses you can build. So there would be a period, you could see certain parts of California being more expensive, but on average, over time, no, California would not be more expensive than other places because supply would match the demand. What? Oh, we've got some lefties here. Wow, how do we get lefties to show up? That's interesting. Dvorak's 8th or 9th. I'm a huge sucker for the New World Symphony. I love it. It's phenomenal. I think you bring a sharp edge to discussions of objectivist ideas, and I think you should keep that up. However, I think you become too irritated with people from the right, and that might not be a good thing. Maybe. If point it out when it actually happens, so I notice it. Even ever thought of publishing one of your essays in video form with editing and good background music? This could be really interesting with viral worthy content. I don't have that many essays, but it's a good idea. I mean, we've done that with some Ayn Rand material. I just don't know how much more audience it gains, but it's a good idea. All right, these ones I'm definitely going to do fast. Let's see. Okay, Yaron, why did Ayn Rand change her name anyway? She changed her name primarily to protect her parents who were in the Soviet Union. She knew she would be writing anti-Soviet, anti-communist stuff, and she was hoping that she could keep the association between her and her family separate, so she wrote under a pseudonym. Her name was Alicia Rosenblum, so I think that's the primary reason she did it, and that's the reason she stated that she did it. You said people at ARI aren't critical enough of you. Could that stem from a past of schisms where those remaining are less confrontational? No, I don't think so. I don't think so. I do think it stems from, to some extent, a past of people who didn't take criticism well. I do think it stems from a certain sense of respect for authority a little bit. There's just a lack of culture and objectivism of internal criticisms. Why that is, I don't think it has to do with schisms, because the schisms were all justifiable. There's a lot of criticisms that don't rise to the level of schisms that should be practiced and haven't been practiced. And you know what? For reasons I'd rather not discuss here, but I hope that culture will change. Should watching child pornography be protected speech? Not the filming of it, but the actual possession of it, currently illegal. Is that a rights violation? I think possession of it should be a rights violation because it's like stolen property. It's the filming of it, the creation of it clearly is a violation of rights. You know it was created as a violation of rights. Therefore, the property itself is, in a sense, stolen. It's stolen from the child. It's stolen from and yes, absolutely, the possession of it should be illegal because of the very product is illegal, because the very making of the product violates rights. So the possession of it violates rights. Is Josh Hawley a Nazi? No, I don't think he's a Nazi, but there's a sense in which he is a national socialist, but not, I don't think he's a racist. I don't think he's an anti-Semite, but I certainly think that there is a streak of kind of nationalist, kind of fascist within him. It astounds me how effective altruism still is today. Does this suggest our team is doing something wrong or missing something? Or maybe we still don't quite have an appreciation for how effective altruism is in terms of affecting people's psychology and getting them when they're young. So maybe it means that we're doing something wrong. Maybe it means that we lack an appreciation for how culture actually works on people. And I think it's the second. I think we don't have a full appreciation of how culture ingrains ideas in people and how difficult those ideas are to get rid of. Do you like Bill Burr? I'm not sure who Bill Burr is. I thought first that it was Bill Barr, the former attorney general, but I don't think that's who you're talking about. Shout out to Blackadder. Absolutely love Blackadder, one of the best comedy shows in history. Most people I know don't seem to find humor in it. It's baffling. I agree with you. One of the best shows ever. I watched Blackadder on your recommendation. I think it's hilarious. Yes, Blackadder is fabulous, smart humor. All right, everybody. 2 hours and 26 minutes. Jonathan Hoenig is slowly getting his wish of 3-hour episodes of the Yaron Brook Show. And there he is, enjoying that fact. So, it's cold in Chicago. It looks like, I guess it's still February in Chicago. That would make it cold.
Awesome show. Keep it up.
Thanks, Jonathan. All right, everybody. I'll see you, I think, Tuesday. Talk to you soon. Bye. Have a great rest of your Sunday. Bye, everybody.